Welcome to Human Anatomy at Cabrillo College during the Corona Fall 2020. I am Matt Halter. We are currently experiencing huge fires here in Santa Cruz. Actually, today is one of the first days in Santa Cruz proper where we have clear skies. Support for any of you who have had challenges with this fire and will continue to. Full disclosure, this video and subsequent videos on human reproduction may be graphic for some, both in images and terminology. If it's an issue for you, if it triggers you for any way, shape, or form, for any reason, please don't watch this and we can figure out other ways to learn this material. So without further ado, let's move on to looking at female reproductive anatomy. Over here on the left would be anterior, to the right would be posterior. One thing I want to point out first, and I always do this when we're looking at reproductive anatomy or really anatomy of any region of the body, is knowing what does not belong to a specific system. So we're talking about the reproductive system. This right here is the rectum, and this is the anus. That is not part of the reproductive system, but you should know what that is to know at least what it is not. This right here is a urinary bladder, and that is where urine is stored. Urine leaves the urinary bladder via this tube right here, which is the urethra. That too is not part of the reproductive system. This is a bone that's part of the pubic symphysis. This is bone right here, part of the sacrum. As far as reproductive structures in this picture, we have the uterus, the uterine tube, otherwise known as the fallopian tube or the oviduct. This right here is an ovary. That's a primary sex organ in females that releases eggs. The egg will get released from the ovary and then proceed down the uterine tube to the uterus. And we'll go into detail on the uterus and the fallopian tube in the subsequent video. Leaving the uterus is the vagina or vaginal canal, which is the birth canal. It's utilized during sexual reproduction, and it's where menstrual fluid or menstrual discharge leaves the uterus and then passes through the vaginal canal. This right here is going to represent the labia minora. There are two sets of folds that are bilateral to a region known as the vestibule. We'll take a look at that. Those two folds are the labia majora and labia minora. We don't see the majora in this picture, but we'll see it in the next. So here we are. This is really the same picture, but in more detail. This right here represents the labia majora. This represents the labia minora. Those two terms, majora and minora, suggest that this fold right here, which is the more lateral of the two folds, is larger than the more medial of the two folds. And the lateral and medial perspective of these may be hard to decipher in this sagittal section, but we'll take a look at it from an inferior perspective and that'll make more sense. But my point here is that the labia majora is not always larger and does not always project more inferiorly than the labia minora. So please keep that in mind. This region right here is just adipose tissue, but externally right here is where pubic hair tends to grow, and we call this region the mons pubis. So we have the mons pubis, the labia majora, the labia minora. This is the urethra, and this is the urinary bladder, which we looked at in the previous slide. On the anterior end of the labia minora, we find the clitoris. And once again, this is the uterus. Leaving the uterus, we have the vaginal canal right here. And on the superior aspect of the uterus, we have the uterine tube, also known as the fallopian tube, and also known as the oviduct. This right here is the ovary, the primary sex organ. All these other organs and structures are secondary. The only primary sex organ in male or females are the gonads, specifically the ovaries in females, the testes in males. And once again, this is the rectum with the anus leaving there. If we look at this from an inferior perspective, mons pubis, labia majora, labia minora. So the big thing to take home with labia majora and labia minora is that the labia minora is medial to the labia majora. On this side, labia majora, labia minora. The labia on the outside of a region known as the vestibule, which is outlined in red here. And within the vestibule, we find the external urethral orifice and the vaginal opening or vaginal orifice. This image is pretty cool, partly because there's Arabic. It's written in Arabic here. I believe this is Arabic. I don't read Arabic. If you do, let me know. But this is the clitoris. This is the external urethral orifice. And this is the vaginal opening or vaginal orifice. This region right here, once again, would be the vestibule, bound by the labia minora on the left and right, and then the labia majora. Next video, we'll go into detail on the uterus.